40 years. I started faceting about 20 years ago. And then over time, you develop a need to find more rough and that sort of thing. So I traveled to Africa and met Bjorn's parents. So we became good friends, and then he found my daughter somehow on the side of the road somewhere. All in good fun, of course. And so now I have a son-in-law as well. But his operation is based in Merisheki Hills, Tanzania. They're a mining family, and good people.
Yeah, so he already said my name. My name is Bjorn Merisheki. I come from Arusha, Tanzania. Arusha is the closest city to the Tanzanite mines, and my father is privileged to own a Tanzanite mine there, and I've been working with him for 4 years plus. And then I met Roger 4 years ago, and actually when he was visiting a faceting school in Tanzania, and I was actually going with him in order to help translate with him, and I had no idea what people do in faceting, how gems come to be faceted the way they are and be so pretty. So I was just going to help him translate, and then I was walking around the class, and that's when I made my decision to try it out and see if I'll enjoy it or not. But I fell in love with it in the middle, and he's been a great help to teach me and show me the right way to do things.
So over a matter of months, he ended up being awarded a scholarship so he could do the training without having to endure the cost himself. And then 5 months later, he comes out with some skills. And so we So this is the school that he participated with, and we had been supporting students in this school for about 7 or 8 years before we met. The gentleman in the center is Peter Sala. We've become good friends with this gentleman. He's been operating the school since 2000. He was a trainer for Tanzanite 1, where they obviously produce lots of Tanzanite. And as you'll see, some of the equipment that came out of Tanzanite 1 later. So as Tanzanite 1 was operating, they would basically use these machines, sometimes even in 2 shifts, so they were basically worn out machines. These were donated in 2000, having been used for 20 years, to the lapidary school that we're looking at here.
Yeah, so when I started at the school, we started on imahashi, or the sterling, or clones of that, putting parts together in order to make a machine. As you can see here, there's like solid tape on the machine, and some of them don't even have the water drip tanks. And so that's what we learned on. Let's see if we have another picture yet. So it's a tripod stand machine, and we would work on marbles, preform marbles. We focused on 7 shapes, so a round cushion, rectangular cushion, pear shape, oval, marquee, and we would have to preform 8 stones first in order to move to the next shape, and we would do that on an imahashi, called an imahashi machine.
So you can see the water tank. They don't even bother putting a cover on it, so all the particles that are in the air are landing in the water. So I'm sure it's very complicated for them to get a nice looking design out of that, but they, I'm sure, suffered through it.
Yeah. Later on, I realized the importance of being clean and making sure like everything is secluded. Your bat laps should be covered. Your drip tank should be covered. If you can see here, that's the same cloth they use to wipe the polish off when you're polishing. The same lap. That's exactly what they use to cover it. So it was a long distance to get to it. The point of this is to like get commercial cutting. We were getting taught to cut commercially, like 5 or 6 stones a day, 7 stones. You can do it, pop it off, get to the next stone, and that's what we were getting taught. And so that's a picture of one of the students there, and we were in a line like this. In like a U shape, and there were machines all around. And so these tripod stands were not proper. the angle on the tripod stand, I found a tripod stand with they used like a knife to put in where 40 degrees would be at 50 degrees. So when you get the tripod stand, the teacher explains to you, okay, so that big line, that's a 50-degree angle. That small line, that's a 40-degree angle. And then, because there were 20 years plus used machines.
So the brass that would normally show where the angles are had been so wiped off and so handled over the years, even just using their fingers, that they no longer show what angle you were aiming for. So they would take a knife and try to emulate where the angle used to be. It isn't like they're separated by 1 degree or whatever. They would just pick the angles, and that's how they worked it.
So this picture here is a machine that's in the middle of the school. It has one speed. It's a faceting, a preforming machine. So you would have 5 or 6 students around it at once, preforming. And as you can see, the drip tank is only watering a part of the lap. So you're not having good use of the lap there. The lap would be over in like 2 weeks. You would have to look for something else because you're only using one part of the
yes,
tank there.
Obviously, if you was working in a place like what we work with, you would find a way to connect the water so the water hit the whole area of the disc and make good use of the whole space. So you can see you got sometimes as many as 5 people gathered around this disc. They could all work on it at the same time, try to get as much out of it as they could. But in so doing, you end up having laps that are totally worn out. It was your lucky day if it was a new lap being put on. So they would sparsely use them to make them last a long time.
So this is a typical picture of a finished gem that you would expect to find in East Africa. I think I did this one, and this was in my early stages of faceting, and I popped this off and I thought I did a really great job, and I thought this was the best. That I was so proud of myself there, but to the knowledge that I had then, I thought I did the best job. And you can see like the polish. Now I know to know that the polish is not finished, and I could have done a better job doing the meat points, but I had no idea then. I thought I was doing a great job. So that's something to expect there. Sometimes you find where they have great polish, but as you can see, the round is not actually round. There's compensation there. There was probably like an inclusion, and decided to like just leave it there. So,
and at the time, they probably felt that was good enough, because if it's still sold, why would they improve their skills if the gem was still saleable?
yeah. So the next picture here is a picture of an addition to the school. Gem Legacy started an initiative of changing the machines that were used there, the Imahashis, and switching them to Facetrons. And this is an addition to the Facetron that was originally there. Gem Legacy is a nonprofit started by Roger Dery that.
Oh, that's my lead-in. Yeah. So Gem Legacy is a 501c3 nonprofit that's based in the United States, but also is licensed to operate in Tanzania as well. And we collect funds and then distribute them to areas of need. And we've, over the years, we've supplied a total of 8 faceting machines to the school, which you'll see in just a minute, allowing them to actually cut more of a Western style as compared to what they've been doing. So moving from a handpiece machine like a Sterling or Imahashi to working with a Facetron, there's a whole, they probably spend a week or 10 days trying to figure out the differences of how they operate to acclimate to a mass style fastening. So this is not a natural thing for them, but there's hundreds of Facetrons scattered throughout Arusha. So many of the major shops are actually working with mass machines like this. In fact, they have a few Ultratechs there too, buddy. But anyway, working on this kind of a machine is a new thing, and the photo that you see here is actually, this is Bjorn's first day trying out a Facetron after working on Imahashi for about 4 months.
Yeah. So I can tell you it was a really big change. I realized that there's a lot that I was missing, and I learned how to compensate when cutting with a tripod stand, but this machine was a big change, and that's a student that was actually teaching me. We were in the same, he was 2 weeks ahead of me, and he was teaching me how to use it because he used it a couple of times. That was my first time, and I was cutting a round there. I remember it was a round marble, a green marble, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is a big difference. I didn't know you can actually have meet points, and you don't have to compensate on. I started understanding that you can use a meter to cut to zero in order to have everything match up. So it was a big change.
So as you look at that machine that he was just working with, you can see that there was like handprints on the side from dirty hands handling it.
Moving it like so.
Yeah, so this machine had been moved from place to place inside their office building. So what Bjorn explained to me later on is that you couldn't work on it during your first 4 months. It was a treat. So you were then, once you graduated to a certain point, you're allowed to work on a modern machine. And even then, it was, that first day is probably turmoil in your head trying to rethink, am I going from my handpiece to the mass? It's not like a natural trajectory. It's something you have to work at.
Yeah. So thanks to John Legacy, there are now 8 machines at the school, and the students that go past there, they're learning on better machines and more modern machines that help them with their cutting. And it's good to learn to see the difference between actually what you should be cutting and what you're cutting. And this machine has helped a lot. I see a lot of students there that they're happy with, oh, this is so different. Oh, I see I can make this better. And I've gone back a couple of times to just try and teach them how to cut like how I know to now, like North American cutting, where there we would call international cuts. So in the school you would have the first few months that you're there, you'd learn how to cut what we call commercial cutting, where here in the States called commercial cutting, but there it would be the normal way of cutting. And then towards the end you would have like a few weeks where you learn how to cut what we call international cutting, where here it's just normal cutting, right? So I went back and I started helping out, teaching a few classes there on how they call it international cutting, but I feel like it should be the normal way of cutting.
So you can see this guy's got a big smile on his face. He's like, wow, he's made this huge transition, like I did it myself kind of thing, you know? So he actually has a great sense of humor. You can see that the machines are actually lined up. They have the desks formed kind of in a U, and they actually have the inset into the desks that they're working with. Yeah.
Roger, was that the typical reaction, Bjorn, of your friends there at the school? Were they excited when they got to use these machines?
Yeah. Well, he was pretty expressive. And he was freely communicating with us. But I think when you saw their faces, and you'll see a few more, the look on their faces like, oh my gosh, I could have been doing this all along. So I think the kids that are coming into school now that are starting on a Facetron, that's their new normal. And so I think it's a great thing that they made this transition.
Yeah. So there we have the president, Dan Lynch. He was out there doing training there with the students.
Oh, wait, it could be past president.
Still current. They haven't booted me out yet.
Yeah. So
part of our mission was not just to bring the machines. Our mission was also to actually assist them in learning how to cut in a much more modern style. Even with the training they have in the machines and all the newer style equipment, this is still leagues behind what we're doing here in the United States. I mean, all the things that you guys have in your situation is like way above this. So this is like basic training of basic training.
Yeah. So just to get a little idea, when people are cutting in Tanzania, they're producing 8, 5, 10 stones a day, and their sole purpose and sole focus is weight. So they don't care about how a stone is looking at the end. They're looking about the carat weight. The stone starts preform at 16. They're trying to get like a 13 finished stone, polished everything, 13 carats. So they don't care about how the flashes are in. Like, am I saving? Am I putting the color in one spot? Like, is it going to be dull when I finish? They don't care about that. They just want to get it off the dot, move to the next stone. So teaching like this, it's kind of like breaking a way that people are used to, and so like, oh, you can cut a stone and make it and understand the flashes of light that come through a stone instead of just weight versus the beauty of the stone.
So the modernization wasn't just modernizing the machines that we're using, the style of faceting. There was also a convincing them that we want to make a beautiful stone, not just a stone with the most weight. Some of the shops in Arusha, you get paid by with the weight of how much you produce. Some pay you by how many gems you finish in a day. But to have them look at this and say, okay, I'm going to cut this to make the most beautiful stone that I can with the equipment that they have, this is a new way of thinking. So this is breaking new ground in their way of operating.
Yeah. So you can see that picture that young man is very happy. This is right after Dan showed him how to use a visor and how he could see his meat points. He was very happy after seeing that.
So in the school, I think they have 1 or 2 loops, and up until us bringing in these visors, they didn't even have any magnification to look at what they were doing. So they didn't recognize, oh my gosh, I have an issue. All they saw was, oh, it could look like that. So it was a new day for them. So you can see the machines are inset in the desks, and they actually have caps on the water tanks. Probably good for them.
Yeah. So we have typically 8 or 9 students go through the school at a certain time, and so they're getting taught by 2 teachers, and they're getting taught theory, and now they're getting taught on international cutting, and we're trying to change the perspective of cutting, and that beauty should always be over weight, and it's a long trip, it's a long road ahead to break that kind of mentality. I had one student that I was teaching, and I was like, oh, what are you cutting? And they were like, oh, I'm just cutting the normal cuts. And I'm like, oh, would you like if I taught you how to cut this way? And she was like, no, I'm fine. There's no point in cutting that. You're going to lose a lot of weight anyways. I'm like, not interested. And I had to keep going at it and saying, hey, this is the way to go. You're going to get at least more money cutting this way, and you're going to produce something better. So it's a long road. People are still thinking in the weight versus beauty kind of perspective.
At this stage, these kids are not in commercial situations. They're strictly in the student phase. They don't understand the dynamics of buying and selling. So they didn't have to think about how much or how beautiful the stone is, because they didn't have to face the person that might be a buyer. We'll go back to you. So Bjorn has been very kind in actually volunteering his time when he's back in Arusha to actually spend, for a while he was doing 1 day a week. He would go in and take the students that are interested in learning a better technique or more efficient technique. So this is him spending time.
Yeah. You can't see it there, but on the piece of paper there, we just write the angles for them, and then they just figure out how to do the midpoints. And I think that's a great idea, a great way of them learning, because one day they won't even have to use the numbers on the index. They just make a design by themselves. Yeah. So that's a typical marble that you preform. We preform that, and then they just put it in a dot stick, and then they would cut on that. But Gem Legacy has something in place where they acquire rough from the local area there, and it's brought to the school so the students can actually facet on actual rough, because as you know, rough is very different from marble. I don't know if anyone has tried cutting on marble and rough, and there's directional hardness, there's like you polish, it's very different polish outcomes. So I think it's a good way out.
So if the students only learn on marbles, when they leave the school, then they have to be retrained by wherever they go to actually learn how to cut on actual gems or gem rough. And in addition to local dealers providing gem rough that they're giving away freely for them to use, obviously it's not like top tier rough. We're also collecting damaged gems that might not have any value to a jeweler and taking pieces they could then practice recutting on actual gems. Because then we're going to have a wider variety than maybe just working on garments. So as I said before, I started on Imahashi, and then I moved
to a Facetron, and luckily Roger Dery had a facet shipped out to Tanzania for me, and that's a facet there that I've been using, and so I see the difference now in all the three machines and the quality of work that you can produce with the right tools that you have. This is a match pair that I did on a facet, and I gotta tell you, having a great machine is a big difference with matched pairs because everything just lines up for you.
Yeah, so these are rhodolite garnets from northeast Tanzania. They probably end up total weight, I guess 16 or 18 carats, something like that. I mean, those are big stones. And this is someone who's did training there in a different kind of style of faceting, and then ended up working on a facet, which is similar to working on Ultratech or Facetron or any other top tier machines. So it ended up producing a great looking piece.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is me cutting a tanzanite luckily from my mine. I got the opportunity to cut a emerald cut tanzanite from my mine, and I enjoyed it. As you can see, the meat points are really crisp, but that's because of using a great machine and the right tools.
Yes, absolutely. And every once in a while we get to produce a really exciting stone. This piece is long gone now. This is green tourmaline. It was about 7 carats when I finished. Some of you might recognize the design from the Vargas books. This is the Electron. Maybe it's Electron 3, he calls it. And there was a time when Bjorn was first faceting with me that I convinced him he should try one of these. So you know this is a total step cut design, pavilion and crown. And so there's very little room for error, because if you over polish something, you have to go and redo the whole row. And wasn't that fun?
Oh my gosh, no, it was not fun. So he kind of like tricked me into doing the designs. Like I've been doing other designs, and he was like, okay, so I have this new design, you should try it. It should be really great for you. And I remember sitting down and I was putting the facets in, and I don't know about anybody else, but step cuts are really tricky for me, especially with many facets like this. I remember I would put this side and it would line up, and then when I go to the next tier, it pushes it down, so I have to go back to the... I spent a day and a half just trying to figure out how to make everything line up. And I did not like Roger a lot after that.
They weren't married yet, so it was a risky maneuver on my part. Anyway, a friend of mine that lives in New Jersey ended up buying the gem from a retail store there, and this is the mounting that she made out of it. It's a beautiful piece, and it looks much nicer in person. It does like this. So in our shop, we like working with facets. That's kind of what I got started with. I've owned Facetrons, I've owned Raytech Shaws, but for the kind of work that we're doing and the speed we want to operate, be able to get knocked off 2 or 3 stones in a day, I find that working on facets seems to be the way to go. I'm not being critical of any other machine. Everybody has the things that they like and don't like, so I'm in the category of this is what I like. I think if I started over, I'd probably try Ultratech and probably a couple others. I didn't have the luxury of being able to do that early on. But yeah, works out great. What you see here is when we buy tanzanite in Tanzania, because they have a restriction in place that you can't export goods that are over 2 grams, you have to get them cut locally. If you buy rough, you have them arranged to be cut locally, and then you can take those gems with you as finished product, even though they don't meet our standard. And what you see here is I'm actually recutting an existing tanzanite and making it into hopefully a beautiful stone.
Not
So this, of course. So this is a classic standard round brilliant on the crown. On the pavilion, I actually have 4 tiers separated by 3 to 4 degrees, and it makes for a beautiful stone. We're looking directly into the table, into the culet at this point. But the design is made so that when you rock it back and forth, it has a level of brightness that you get to follow with your eye. There's no escaping it being bright.
Yeah. So. Just to go back about the school a little bit, so Gem Legacy offers a scholarship to the students. It's $750 per student, and this provides low training for the theory of gem cutting, gem identification, and then the other part of that is where they get to spend time learning the Facetron machine, and they're learning how we cut here. Yeah.
And the next photo is just, I threw this in for fun because I love the wildlife in East Africa, and this is one of the things that we run across. This is actually north and west of where his mine is, but to see a giraffe in the wild is kind of a fun thing. So.
Yeah.
Questions? Yes?
One of the things I was curious about, since you used a lot of tentative words in the description, is what's life like for a person that has gone through the school now and has to go out in the real world and earn a living? What happens to them, and how do they cut, actually?
Are you asking about Bjorn or about the students coming out of
I'm
school?
just saying the students coming out of the classes you talked about. What's life like for them when they go try to find a job? How many of you get to cut on a machine like that, for example, even a passive job, let alone something better?
Well, there are a couple guys that you know as well that are in Arusha that were graduates probably of much earlier. They moved from the Raytech Shaw model, the Imahashi model, to Facetron probably 10, 12 years ago. You and I would look at that machine and say, oh my gosh, that thing is totally worn out. But they have developed the technique on even with the worn out parts to keep it working. In fact, they do a lot of rebuilding of their own machines. So these guys might cut 2, 3, or 4 gems in a day. On Imahashi, they might cut 7 or 8. Now, you would look at those 7 or 8 that they cut at Imahashi and think, oh my gosh, who's ever going to want that in the United States? Well, probably not. Maybe if you're on a cruise ship. The guys that cut on the Facetron are cutting in a way that it's so close to being what we might accept here. But I still have to repolish them because they only work with 14,000 diamonds as a finish, sometimes even lower.
International standard.
That's right. So you can see all the, exactly. So you see all the polishing lines. So the guys that leave the school, our goal is to interface with local commercial cutting outfits and arrange for them to have a job. That takes someone on the ground being there, you know, 12 months a
I'm
year.
wondering how many of the jobs have them back on an Imahashi.
Well, some of those guys have to go back to Imahashi, that's right. But we are hoping to find more jobs for them with firms that have moved on to the Facetron or other mass machines.
Well, as you know, there are places in the world where people use Sterling or Imahashi to turn out gorgeous looking gems. So just the fact that they learn how to look at better looking cuts might still allow people, even in the older environment, to learn to cut well. And create gems that could sell here.
Well, there are people that do that, but they're focused on weight as compared to
Well,
what
that
you
is what the world's like.
Yes, so they're focused on weight, not necessarily beauty, and that's, you have to make a compromise somewhere. David?
So, you know, we hear a lot.
Yes?
Sorry, I just wanted to go back to your question because it was a really great question. Most of them who are graduating are actually going to work on Facetron machines. When there were all Imahashi style machines in school, and we're using a large amount of donors' money to buy new machines, we wanted to make sure we were doing the research. So we polled local gem faceting operations to find out what type of machine they were using the most. And Facetrons are the ones that are being used most, or they were planning on purchasing that brand. There's the most replacement parts available, there's the most people trained in fixing them, all of those things that we wanted to make sure we were putting in place. So that's why we picked Facetron machines, because to your question, when they were being trained in Imahashi style machines and graduated, they couldn't get placed in jobs because they weren't up to snuff, which was the reason for modernizing the school with the Facetron machines, because it didn't make sense to keep paying scholarships and having people graduate and get jobs, which was why we modernized the school with Facetron machines.
Facetron has done very well worldwide.
Yes.
Their machines were cheaper and people weren't stupid. They bought those machines and they're all over everywhere. Particularly, in the East. I mean, if you go further east into those countries, you'll find lots of them also. Which is why I don't think Facetron bothers to sell so much in the U.S. anymore.
David, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. So, you hear a lot about, people have been around for decades. Remember, like, the Tanzanite was, like, so cheap.
Yeah.
There's like, oh, man, I like that right there. You hear a lot about, like, okay, they put a big fence around, the government's in control, and, a lot of different things. I just want to hear a little bit about the relationship between mine owners, government, the schools, like how those different interlocking relationships work. Is the government supporting the schools? Does the government tax the Tanzanite? How controlled is it? You know, they're not allowing these bigger stones out. I presume to have people cut them. But then there's this school discharging people to learn how to cut them. It just seems a little convoluted. So help us with those interlocking relationships.
Yeah, so concerning Tanzanite, they put a wall around the whole area where it's being mined, and then they put offices at the gate area. So what you're required when you produce Tanzanite, like we produced last summer and a little bit after that, you're required as a mine owner to call the government. So they come from the gate to your mine property, and when they get there, they come with a scale and they weigh everything that you have, and they put a seal on it. The seal is just so you don't change whatever that's in there if you had other that you were hiding or anything. And then you're required to go to the gate after that. They leave you with your parcel and you're required to go to the gate with it. When you get to the gate, you enter this office where you have a bunch of officers who are there, people from the Ministry of Mines, National Security, you have immigration, Tanzania Revenue Authority is there, you have an actual soldier who's there. So there's a big committee that's on, like, in that room. And then they have the permission now to open your seal, and they open it and they re-weigh it. They weigh each piece, and the Ministry of the Mine officers, they value each piece according to how it looks. And then you have a piece of paper that every single person in that room signs to make sure what was valued was correct. And then they give you back everything that's yours. They put a seal on it, and then you have to go pay for it. You can't leave with your product there. You have to go pay for it first. So what we're typically...
Hold on, stop there. So that's, you're paying a tax, or
Yeah.
you're paying the government for the right to mine, or
No,
you're just paying a bunch of bureaucrats that are in existence
So you're paying 6% tax for what you've produced,
to the value.
the value.
Okay.
Yes.
Value-added tax.
So I go and I pay. After that, I get my parcel and I can go sell freely wherever I please.
So you don't have to go to a central government market?
That was before. Now they put a thing in place where I have to sell in the gem centers that they have placed. So there's one in Arusha town, which now is not, you can't buy or sell Tanzanite in that facility anymore. They've moved it to the Merani town. So everything concerning Tanzanite is placed in that area. So yeah. So you have to buy, and cutting should be done in that area.
So they were planning on building 14 gem centers around the country. There's maybe 4 or 5 that have been built. 2 in Arusha, there's one in the Tanga province, or region, which is by the Indian Ocean. There's one in Namanga, where it's the border crossing between Kenya and Tanzania, and there's a few others as well. So they now have cutting operations set up around those gem centers, so everything is done locally and centrally.
So then I'm not quite done. So now you've got a stone, and you can sell it in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Then now we still have this school over here that's charging people to learn.
Mhm.
So the government is not supporting that at all.
Can you talk about the government?
Yeah, so the government has its own school that it's at the Ministry of Mines in Arusha. It's just right next to it, and they have machines also, just like the other school, and they have also trainings going on there. So that's the part of the government trying to help people learn the trade. And they're working on imahashis. They have a few Ultratechs in there, a few Raytechs, some Graves machine for preforming. Yeah.
And there's nobody's bringing the Chinese machines?
I have not seen the Chinese machine yet. Yeah. So mostly Ultratech is what you'll find. Facetron.
There's an Ultratech dealer in Tanzania now. You probably know who she is.
Yeah.
He was next.
Oh, go ahead.
So the government's not letting out more pieces of Tanzanite? Is
Can
that
you
something?
take your
Is
mask
that
for a
something?
second?
Is that something new that the government's not doing? Laying Tanzite out? Because I saw recently like 30, 40 carat pieces of Tanzite rough.
So that could be old parcels from people, but my knowledge is that 2 grams and above is not allowed out of the country unless
So-
it's a specimen.
Come tonight at 5:45.
Yeah, yeah,
You'll get more than your answer on that.
yeah,
Did you say
definitely.
9:45?
5:45 tonight.
Yeah,
5:45.
yeah, definitely.
Farouk Hashimi and several are doing a talk on what does ethical sourcing mean in this world today, and he'll address some of that. There's lots of Tanzanite in this town right now that technically could not legally be exported.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think so.
Tonight is probably a good place for them to talk about what they're doing and how they've done it,
And why?
and why, yeah.
So
And then-
even though it's your mine,
Mhm.
you can't like say, hey, I want to bring 4 or 5 to the show.
Specimen I could bring to the show.
But they all have to be small.
No, I can bring any size specimen.
Uncovered.
Uncuttable if it's specimen. If it's rough, it has to be 2 grams and under, or I have to cut it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
You were
okay.
next.
And do these same restrictions apply to Savorite and other varieties, garnets, spinels?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's 6 gems that have a restriction on them, not just tanzanite.
Wow.
So tanzanite, ruby, sapphire, emerald, savorite, and spinel have a restriction.
Does that apply to the mint garnets as well?
Yeah.
Yes.
I know they're
Any
Savorite.
of the green garnets, that says
Gotcha.
savorite, but it applies to green garnet in general.
Yeah.
Raj, did you talk about like the view of the government and how they want to be more like other countries to have a value added and like why they're doing this?
That's a good point. So, as my wife mentioned about the value-added scenario, to give you an example, in Sri Lanka, they don't export any rough, at least legally. The concept is they want to create employment in their own country, so they have somewhere around 25,000 gem cutters, most of them located near or around Colombo. And so many other countries are trying to follow the Sri Lankan model to create employment in their own countries. So Tanzania, at one point in time, forced all tanzanite over 1 gram to be cut in the country. Then they relented, a couple years later made it 2 grams because it wasn't feasible. There's about roughly 700 gem cutters in all of Tanzania. That's not a lot of people to cut all that rough. And yet you have 25,000 cutters in Sri Lanka. It's an interesting comparison. And yet in Kenya, there's less than 50 professional gem cutters. If they don't have a school in Kenya, they all come to one of the 3 schools in Tanzania to learn how to do gem cutting, and then they eventually go back to Kenya if they choose to. So I think Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, many of them are moving towards a model of cut the gems in the country so we can create employment for our own people. So we're not saying that's a good or bad thing. I still want to go there and buy rough while they still allow me to. But if they're going to be cutting all the goods in the country, I may end up having to go there 5 years from now and buy cut stones and then recut them, which is what we do from Sri Lanka anyway. Is that it?
So is there a saw service? You say, yeah, just cut this 4 gram piece into 2 tubes?
One could do that, but why would you? Why would you do that?
That's the only way you can get out of the country.
So if
Well,
you're-
why not cut the 4 gram piece?
It has to be truly faceted.
Yeah.
No, if you have a 4 gram piece and you
Because
cut it in half, you get 2 gram pieces.
Because a stone cut from a 4 gram piece is worth a lot more than
Well,
Yeah,
of course,
cut from a
of
2
course,
gram.
but
So
that's-
there's your answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how do you get it out of the country? without-
You have someone rough cut it.
You have them rough cut it and fasten it roughly
Yeah.
as a local, normal,
Exactly.
and then
Yeah, and to his point, when they're I gave an idea like a 16 karat stone preform would end up at a 13 or 12 and a 0.8 carat finished stone. So you still have a pretty good piece to still work on. So that's another way people are deciding to go.
Well, we have acquired pieces previously from Arusha where we knew what the starting weight was of the rough, and they talked to us about what they had as a preform, and then they ended up finish cutting it in their style, which, you know, if it has a slight bulge on the pavilion, I have more to work with to make a more perfect stone. If they cut it wafer thin, then I wouldn't even choose that stone. So it wouldn't be uncommon to find 5 or 10 pieces available for us to do that and then bring them back, or more than 5 or 10. But that's possible, and that's one way to go. Yeah.
So, is being a gem cutter a prestigious job, and does it provide a good living in Tanzania?
Yeah, it does.
And
And the more you cut, the more people know about you, and the more work you're gonna get. I have friends who have a cutting center there at the gem center, and you have a bunch of people just rolling through. I've sat down with them just to have a talk, and like you always get interrupted because people are just coming over with pieces. They're like, hey, can you preform this for me? Hey, can you cut this for me? And it also gives them a good opportunity to buy rough. That's another thing that they do. They buy rough for themselves so they can cut and then sell it to other dealers there.
So it wouldn't be uncommon, Kel, for a shop like he's speaking about with a couple guys in it, to have a dealer come in and he's got 10 pieces of rough, and maybe he might not have the cash to pay them, but if you cut 9 of these, I'll give you 1 piece of rough as payment. And now they have a piece of rough they can go out and sell for probably more than they were going to be compensated as for the labor. Yes?
I just wanted to add something. Kel's question about it, it's really a good, if you can make a good living with that. With all the conversation about whether or not you can export rough, and we may have a very unpopular opinion on this, but this is why Gem Legacy is supporting educating gem fasters, because it actually is, for an East African job, it's actually a pretty impressive wage that people are making. I wouldn't say they're upper level, but they're definitely like the middle of the economy for what they're making for their families, which is, a large portion of the population there is way under what they should be able to live on. While we might all want to export rough, we really believe in the ability to create jobs and have people in those jobs, and create a whole new generation of young people who didn't even know they could have a career in something that would last their whole life. So while we all might want to export rough, we're actually creating jobs, and it's not that bad to come home and lose a couple bucks by having to make a gem a little bit smaller. So that's our possibly unpopular opinion on that, but it's the reason why Gem Legacy is so focused on educating gem fasters.
but you're helping people feed themselves and their families.
Yes,
like,
that's the goal.
that makes sense.
I can see from what I'm hearing that some people who are not necessarily spending a great deal of worry on what the people who are cutting in Tanzania are doing, because how well they're doing in that. Because if they just took the pieces that you're talking about and cut them into fat gems that were actually slightly polished and sell them, there's not a lot of value add there. So that means that the people that are working are not going to be able to make a lot of money, because they're not creating anything of great value. They're just creating something to get out of the country. I assume there's a value added tax, however,
Yes.
on stuff that goes out. The
Yes.
cutters are going to get taxed again when they finish a product and then sell it outside the country, right?
Yeah. So just to
So
change.
that value-added tax is an interesting thing, because that goes to the government.
Yeah.
And the other side of the coin is that also encourages the people who are running the businesses there to not add so much value and just move everything up in volume and get it out of there.
So just to change the perspective a little bit, there are people who would just cut to get export out, but there are also people just cutting because it's their piece of rough and they want to sell to a dealer because you're gonna get more money per carat than selling per gram, definitely. So they're cutting in order to save weight so they can sell to a dealer and get more money out of it. So there are some people who are just cutting to make it bulgy so they can have it exported, but there are actually other people who are just selling because it's my piece of rough and I acquired it and I want to sell it and get more money.
And will that mixed environment stay forever? Do you think that's the way it'll be for, as long as the government doesn't change anything, that's the way it'll continue to work for a long time?
Well, I left my crystal ball in the car. I don't think we have an answer for that, because I'm an American, he's a Tanzanian. Even though we know a lot about what happens with the Tanzanite trade in East Africa, we don't know everything. So, and there's a new president that took over after the previous president passed away in Tanzania, and her perspective on how things should be done might be different than his. So we're probably still operating a little bit from the president that passed away and gradually moving into what things will be in the future. Yeah.
And concerning Tanzanite itself, the laws are changing every week, maybe every month. So whenever someone advises the president that this could be a good idea, they decide to change the law. So it's something that they're still trying to figure out to find the right way to move forward. So the government benefits, the miners benefit, and because the taxes, it helps build roads, it's building schools. So it's not a bad thing to have Tanzanite taxed. So
The comments you made about Sri Lanka earlier and them wanting that model, since they're right now not having that many fasteners in the country, they need to move the material out of the country to make money for everybody in the process. So somehow they're going to have to look at a transition strategy, right? If they really want to get to where Sri Lanka is.
yeah.
And that does need some changes, but I'm wondering how they're going to go about it, because they're going to have to sponsor and or work on getting those people who want to really cut great gems that will sell directly to jewelers, to cut.
Spoken well by a project manager, I'm sure.
So I think that's the 2 gram and under rule. I think that should help because you're forcing everybody to make sure that they have everything cut in the country